My next guest said that Christians and atheists actually have more in common than you think. Dr. KRISH KANDIAH, welcome to Canada. You're from the UK. Good to have you here at Breakforth.
Great to be here, Greg.
Now, you have a book, God is Stranger. Tell me what that looks like.
So a lot of people find God quite difficult to understand, particularly when they open the Old Testament. God keeps doing really weird things. And sometimes we Christians try to airbrush that out, but actually I think those strange parts are the bits that could help people unlock a whole new level of understanding with God. We don't have to be embarrassed about the Bible. Those difficult parts we can kind of face head on. And I guess try not to edit the Bible so it suits our preferences. So that book is trying to open up some big questions.
So Christians and atheists have more in common than that might be understood. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so my latest book is available, I think it's available in Canada, it's definitely available in the UK. It's called Faitheism, Why Christians and Atheists Have More in Common Than You Think. And I wrote that book because I was frustrated. I read a lot of atheist books about Christians, and I really didn't recognise the Christians they were talking about. They found the most extreme cases of Christianity, like Westboro Baptist Church.
They're boycotting or they're picketing at a funeral of a US soldier.
Yeah, or they're blowing up abortion clinics, or they're trying to scare people in the kingdom. And, you know, I travel around the country. I meet thousands of Christians every year. I've never met a Christian that fits that stereotype. But equally, I've read a lot of Christian books about atheists. And I don't recognise the atheists they're talking about. They assume most atheists are like Richard Dawkins. They're on a kind of one-man mission to destroy the Christian faith. And that isn't my experience of most atheists. Most atheists I know are also, you know, volunteering to help our local soccer team, or they're involved in the Parent-Teachers Association at school. They share many of our same values and ideas in life. And so this book is trying to find common ground that Christians and atheists can agree on, and then out of a sense of respect for one another, then begin to talk about some of the differences.
You know, when we have a spiritual conversation, KRISH, we often will focus on our differences.
That's right.
And there are differences between being a Jesus follower and an atheist, but there are some points of agreement. And then when you have the conversation and then you go from there?
Yeah, yeah. I think about it this way. I used to live on a really busy road in London, and as soon as I moved in, I went to visit my neighbour. And my neighbour had a big white van. He was a contractor. He did electrical installations, and I was a pastor of a church. So we didn't really have a lot in common, but I went and knocked on the door, and I said, "Hello, I'm new. I'd like to invite you for coffee." And he said, "Well, I've got coffee here, thank you. Why would I want some of yours?" I said, "Well, I thought I'd get to know you." And he says, "Well, I don't know you. Why would I want to get to know you?" So I thought, we are not getting anywhere. I completely failed in this relationship. And I bought a really rubbish old car, and one day it just died. You know, there was just fumes coming out of everywhere. So I popped the bonnet of the car, and just hopefully with
the bonnet?
What do you call it?
Oh, well, hood.
The hood.
Yeah.
Fine.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, let me contextualise. Okay. I popped the hood of the car, and, you know, there's smoke coming out. I've just got a spanner, and to be honest, I don't really... A
spanner?
Yeah, a wrench.
Okay.
Well, two nations divided by a common language.
We have the common queen, though.
We do. We love her to bits. In fact, you have a day for her. We don't even celebrate.
Really?
Yeah. Oh. Anyway, so I've got a wrench after I popped the hood of my car, and there's smoke coming out everywhere, and I don't really know what I'm doing. But my neighbour has spotted me with my wrench, and he's out of his house as quick as he can be, toolbox in hand, and there we are, you know, both of our heads under the hood of this car, and we're having a conversation. We're having a conversation about life and everything else, because he wasn't ready for a face-to-face conversation. That wasn't where he was coming from. Yeah. But he could have a shoulder-to-shoulder conversation with me, and that was okay. So, you know, every time I needed a conversation, I used to just pop the hood of the car and hope he'd come out. I think in our relationship with atheists, sometimes that can be the best way we can get started. We come at them full blast, I want to have a full-on conversation with you, let's talk about our differences, and I wonder whether there's some common practices that we can be doing. There's lots of things that Christians and atheists agree on. We did a lot of work in the UK trying to help refugees find a safe passage to the UK. To be honest, some of our best collaborators were atheist people. We shared common conviction about the dignity of life. We could work together, and in that partnership, then there was room for a deeper conversation.
I know something you're very passionate is the following the teachings of Jesus when it comes to the widows and the orphans. Yeah. And you're not just doing this on an intellectual basis. You do this in your home. You've got 7 kids, 3 that have been, you know, biological children, and then you have either adopted or fostering. Why have you done that?
Well, in the book of James, we're told that true religion that God our Father accepts as pure and blameless is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. And I take that verse very personally. When God, and Christians believe God speaks through the Bible, God tells us what he's actually looking for in worship. I've been to many church services and I've spoken to people at the door, you know, waving goodbye and saying goodbye, and a lot of people going, oh, that was rubbish, you know, the music was boring or the preacher was boring, and I'm going, I'm really sorry, I'll do a better job next time. No. but often Christians evaluate worship for what they got out of it. And we don't actually ask God, to whom the worship is offered, what was he looking for? Well, in the book of James, God tells us what God is looking for. He's looking for us to pass on the love that he's shown to us to vulnerable people. And in the ancient world, the most vulnerable people were kids that weren't living under the protection of their father and their family, and orphans who and widows, who didn't have a protector, father figure or husband figure to look after them. It's different in our world today, but there are still kids who are incredibly vulnerable. Here in Canada, the stats are around 28,000 children under the age of 14 are in foster care. We don't even know the stats for how many kids over the age of 14 are in foster care. Many of those kids are from Aboriginal backgrounds. Apparently Aboriginal children make up 7% of the Canadian population, but they make up nearly 50% of the looked after foster care population. So they're hugely overrepresented. Now, in the UK and in Canada, the stats of kids who come into foster care and then never find a loving, supporting, permanent family, they age out and then we hit them again in other demographics. So in the UK, it's nearly 50% of our prison population have been in foster care. In the homeless population, care leavers are 1% of the UK population, but they're 25% of the homeless population. And sex workers, you know, people that have, you know, found no other option except entering into prostitution. In some areas it's 30%, in other areas it's 70% of young women are girls who have aged out of foster care. I think that's terrible. The church is often seeking to help people that are in prison, that are being trafficked or are homeless. But I say, look, why wait until the system has beaten these kids up and spat them out again? Why don't we get involved earlier? And they're often in need when they're 3 or 4 years old. In the Psalms, God says he places the lonely in families. God is a protector of widows and orphans. So the simple argument is, if you want to be a Christian, it means you want to start following God's ways, you want God's characters, God's priorities to be yours. God says he prioritizes caring for the vulnerable, so we need to too. And you know, we Christians, sometimes we talk a good game when it comes to justice. You know, I'll sing a song about justice, I'll write a blog post about justice, I'll tweet about justice. Well, here's a very practical way that we can demonstrate justice to those that are being marginalised and ostracised in society. It isn't for everybody. You know, this isn't a kind of arm twist. You really need to be passionate about it. You need to go in with your eyes open, because you will hear stories that will break your heart. 70% of the kids in the foster care system in the UK have experienced sexual violence or physical abuse. And they carry scars, some of them physically on the outside, all of them emotionally on the inside, that don't go away with a few bedtime stories and nice dinners. We need ongoing love and support for these children. But to be honest, I don't know a better parable of what Christians believe than fostering or adoption, because you may not know this, but the Bible says that if you're a Christian, you've been adopted into God's family.
Right. Adoption is so powerful.
That's the highest privilege that God could possibly give you, that God is not just, you know, interested in your church attendance. He wants your whole life to be part of his family, for you to be called his child and for him to be called your father. God is so committed to us. Now think about this. Why did God adopt you? What was it that God needed that you gave him? Christians believe actually there's nothing that we give God that he didn't have already. God did not adopt you because he needed it. God adopted you because you needed it. And I'm asking the church, let's model that same grace.
Dr. KRISH KANDIAH, thank you for sharing. I catch your passion, you know, for reaching people that don't know Jesus, and also for doing the practical things. So thank you for coming to Edmonton.
My pleasure. I'll come again. The weather's nice here.
Yeah, not bad at all. We'll be right back.